Officers Malcolm Hayes and Darnell Wright were well acquainted with the grittiest parts of the city. Every shift brought the same exhausting routine: break-ins, fights, and drug busts. These tasks weren't handed to them randomly. Captain Harold Denton, a no-nonsense leader with a reputation for his bias, had a knack for assigning the dirtiest jobs to Malcolm and Darnell. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. By the way, what city are you watching us from? Write it in the comments, we're curious. It was a chilly evening when they received a vague report of unusual cries in a back alley. The call came through as just another minor nuisance, something no other officers would have bothered with. But Malcolm and Darnell never ignored a call, no matter how trivial it seemed. Arriving at the location, the alley was dimly lit, reeking of garbage and decay. As they walked toward the source of the noise, the faint, desperate cries grew louder. The sound wasn't from an animal, as they had assumed, it was something else. Malcolm's flashlight scanned the area until the beam landed on a rusted dumpster. Darnell froze. They both knew this was no ordinary disturbance. Malcolm cautiously lifted the lid of the dumpster. At first, it looked like a pile of old blankets tossed away with the trash. Then, a tiny hand moved, followed by a sharp cry. Both men gasped. Nestled in the filth was a newborn baby, his skin pale and blotchy, wrapped in a soiled blanket. His cries were hoarse and frantic, as though he knew his life depended on being heard. Darnell quickly reached in, cradling the fragile infant in his arms. The baby's face was smeared with dirt, his little body trembling from the cold. Malcolm immediately called for medical backup, his voice steadier than he felt. As they waited for help, Darnell gently wiped the baby's face with his sleeve, murmuring reassurances. "Who could do this?" Malcolm muttered under his breath, his usual professionalism giving way to visible anger. But there was no time to dwell on questions, they needed to get the baby to safety. The ambulance arrived minutes later, whisking the infant to the hospital. As the paramedics drove off, Malcolm and Darnell stood in the now empty alley, the gravity of what they had just witnessed weighing heavily on them. It wasn't the first time they had seen something horrific on the job, but this felt different. They didn't know it yet, but this discovery would upend their lives. The next morning, Malcolm and Darnell were called to Captain Denton's office. They expected a routine briefing or, more likely, another grueling assignment. Instead, they found Denton pacing, his face pale and hands trembling. This wasn't the cold, unflappable man they were used to seeing. Without preamble, Denton revealed that his estranged daughter, Rebecca, had given birth recently but had been unreachable for weeks. The baby they had rescued matched the description of his missing grandson. Denton's voice cracked as he thanked the officers, but his gratitude was mixed with palpable guilt. Malcolm and Darnell were taken aback. They had known Denton as a man who looked down on them, assigning them tasks that others avoided. Yet here he was, vulnerable and reliant on the very people he had undervalued. The connection between Denton and the baby made the case personal. Rebecca's absence and the baby's abandonment raised more questions than answers. Denton, desperate for answers but unwilling to show weakness, asked Malcolm and Darnell to investigate further. For the first time, the captain entrusted them with a case of profound importance. The officers left the office in silence. As they walked down the hall, Darnell finally spoke. "Looks like we're in this deeper than we thought." Malcolm nodded, already piecing together their next move. They weren't just solving a case, they were uncovering the story of a fractured family and, unknowingly, paving the way for a profound shift in their precinct. Malcolm and Darnell immediately began piecing together the mystery of the abandoned baby. Their first lead came from the dumpster itself. Inside, they found remnants of a bloodied hospital bracelet. The name was partially smudged, but the last name, Denton, was legible. They traced it back to St. Mary's Hospital, where Rebecca Denton had given birth 2 weeks earlier. At the hospital, the staff confirmed that Rebecca had checked out against medical advice shortly after delivering the baby. Witnesses described her as disoriented, struggling with what seemed to be postpartum depression. A nurse recalled seeing her leave with a man who matched the description of someone known for illegal activities in the area. This led the officers to question local gang members and petty criminals. The investigation brought them to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The desk clerk reluctantly confirmed that Rebecca had stayed there briefly, but she had left days ago, leaving no forwarding address. The only thing she left behind was a crumpled photograph of her and the baby. Darnell held the photo, his expression tight. Rebecca's eyes in the photo were filled with a mix of love and desperation. They both knew this wasn't just about abandonment, it was about someone who had reached a breaking point. The investigation now had two goals: finding Rebecca and understanding what led her to abandon her child in such a horrific way. As they dug deeper, they uncovered Rebecca's struggles with substance abuse and her estrangement from her father. It became clear that Denton's rigid, authoritarian parenting style had driven a wedge between them. Malcolm and Darnell exchanged glances. This wasn't just a case. It was a mirror reflecting the systemic failures they had both experienced firsthand. The baby's survival and the mounting evidence of Rebecca's tragic situation began to weigh on Captain Denton. He had always prided himself on his strict demeanor, but now he found himself questioning the beliefs he had clung to for decades. The officer's commitment to solving the case, even after years of being sidelined by Denton, left him humbled. When Rebecca was eventually found in a rehabilitation center, emaciated and emotionally shattered, Denton accompanied Malcolm and Darnell to speak with her. Seeing his daughter in such a state broke him in ways he hadn't thought possible. Rebecca confessed everything: the overwhelming shame of her addiction, the fear of being a terrible mother, and the desperation that led her to leave her baby in the dumpster. Denton's voice shook as he told her they had found her son and that he was safe. For the first time, Malcolm and Darnell saw not a hardened superior but a father trying to make amends. Denton personally thanked them, acknowledging not just their professionalism but their humanity, qualities he had failed to recognize before. In the weeks that followed, Denton became an unexpected advocate for Malcolm and Darnell within the department. He started assigning them higher-profile cases and publicly commending their work. The shift wasn't just professional, it was personal. Denton's newfound respect for his officers, coupled with his efforts to repair his relationship with his daughter, signaled a profound transformation. The baby, now named Isaiah, became a symbol of second chances, not just for Rebecca but for Denton himself. As Malcolm and Darnell watched the family reunite in a supervised visit, they couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. They hadn't just saved a life, they had changed a narrative. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support.